This morning we're starting a new series for these next 5 weeks, and the title of it is Before and After. Before and After. And before and after stories, I think, are stories that the movie makers have realized make great movies. I think of some amazing ones that probably we have all heard about. Some of us have heard about it anyway. I think of one of the most vintage movies of all time, It's a Wonderful Life. And you think about the main character, George Bailey, one of Pastor Michael's long-lost relatives. He's touched by an angel during this time, and before his encounter with this angel, he is convinced that he's a failure and life is absolutely worthless. And after his angelic encounter, George is convinced that he has more friends than Mark Zuckerberg, and he's blessed. He's blessed in how truly blessed he is. A few weeks ago, our family went to see another movie that's out in the pictures right now called Hidden Figures. Maybe you've seen it. I don't want to wreck it for you if you haven't seen it. I can do nothing but highly recommend this movie. But it's a true account of how 3 African American women changed the culture of NASA in the early 1960s. And it's truly an inspiring before and after story. You need to go see it if you haven't seen it before, because I think real life beats made up life every single time. And this year, many of you know that this is the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And of course, being a Lutheran church, we think about Martin Luther from time to time. And he had a couple of before and after dramatic experiences in his life. But the most dramatic of all probably was his true discovery, when God broke through to him. Before, he was terrified of God because he felt that God's love for him depended upon him being able to keep up his good works. He had to earn it. And then after his encounter with God, he realized he could have a relationship with God by grace through faith. And it had nothing to do with his good works or him having to earn it. It had to do what God had done for him through Jesus. And of course, we know his teaching has influenced millions of people to receive the free gift of God's friendship with them, rather than trying to earn it with being perfect. I bet you if we were to sort of cull through our life and think about situations, defining moments, places where we have either come in contact with an incredible love in our life, the love of God, or the love of another person, or maybe we've had a teaching that has just come upon us, and we realize, oh my goodness, before I was this, and now after I'm this. If you look through the Gospels, particularly the Gospel of John, there are just account after account after account of Jesus coming in contact and having an encounter with lots of different people. And we decided that over this series, it would be very worthwhile for us to pick five or so of those episodes of those real life encounters and see what happened before and what happened afterwards. Because we believe that being with Jesus changes us from the inside out. It changes everything. It alters our life trajectory. And so our first account today is going to come from the Gospel of John, as I said before, chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. And you can follow along with me on the screen or in the Bibles or wherever on your cell phones or wherever you want to pull it up. John chapter 5, it says, "Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" "I can't, sir," the sick man said, "for I have no one to put me in the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me." Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat and walk." Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat." But he replied, "The man who healed me told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "Who said such a thing as that?" they demanded. The man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. But afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, "Now you are well, so stop sinning, or something else even worse might happen to you." Then the man went and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had healed him. This is God's word for us today. Now, before we kind of dive into the meat of this text, if you have a Bible in front of you, you're going to see that there is a footnote or a little note at the bottom of this section, and it adds a little chunk, this chunk here, to the end of verse 3, where it says, "Waiting for a certain movement of the water, for an angel of the Lord came from time to time and stirred the water. And the first person to step in after the water was stirred was healed of whatever disease he had." Now, most likely, what this little paragraph does, of course, is explain the myth that was around this particular pool of Bethesda. And most likely what happened is that when John wrote this account, everyone to whom he was writing knew about the tradition surrounding this pool. It didn't need to be explained to them. It was commonplace. But as time passed and John's gospel was passed around, some of the people reading it did not know the details about this pool. So in a later copy, a priest probably added this little note. Most believe that it's not a part of the original text, but it's helpful background for us to know. There's just a little aside that goes along with this. When we were in Israel several years ago, we learned that if you go to Jerusalem today, you can actually go to the place where this pool is, the pool of Bethesda. It's a big open area with the 5 porches that are described, and it was excavated in the late 1800s, I believe the 1880s, something like that. And interestingly enough, when they were looking for it, they went right to the Gospel of John, and notice it says at the beginning, it says, "By the sheep gate." So guess where they started digging? By the sheep gate. And by golly, they found it. And it's amazing how that works. So that's just a little interesting sort of scientific background part of that whole thing. But it gets us into the text this morning. And I have 4 very, very simple observations that I want to make this morning about this story. And maybe you can relate to each one of them. And the first one is, there's always circumstances. There's always circumstances in our life. Everybody has circumstances in their life. A place where we need healing. A place where we need a breakthrough in our lives. So physically speaking this morning, this guy has an illness. But there's more. Because you see, there is this pool of healing has ultimately become a very cruel and deceptive place for him. A place where many people were being lured in by this great promise. I think the pool mirrors a lot of what's going on in our world today, that things that seek to persuade us with their deceptive assurances, the get-rich-quick scams, and get in shape in 1 minute a day sort of things that are promised to us that we know in our brain there's no way that that's a possibility, but yet how many times are we just sort of reeled in by the fact of, well, maybe there's a chance. Maybe it could be that way. And John tells us that this guy had been laying there for 38 years. Think about that. 38 years to be caught up in something like this. That's the equivalent of saying today he'd been there since 1979. Think about that. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? I think we can, because I think there are some of us maybe that have been caught up in things that we need to be healed from for a long time. 38 years, this place must have held great hope for this man. But in the present day, you got to believe that it doesn't hold much hope at all after 38 years. But the weird thing is that he stays there. He stays there. This place has now become all he knows. It's not wonderful, but it's very predictable. It's not great, but it's controllable and it's known. It's not the best life, but it's a life. He had a spot where he could lie all day long and he could beg. He was in a place nearby the city gate where there would have been a constant flow of people walking by. He had a story that surely would have elicited their sympathy. And so here he waits. And that brings us to my second observation this morning. The second, there's always, and the second one is there's always excuses. There's always excuses. Notice that it's Jesus who initiates the contact with him. The man does not approach Jesus or yell for him. Notice Jesus asks the first question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? Now, for some of us, we might be thinking, what kind of question is that? I mean, at first glance, we might put this in the category of what we might call a dumb question, right? A dumb question. I remember reading a story. The writer asked, have you ever asked a dumb question? And the writer's name was Ken Davis, and he writes that one time he was on an airplane, and he was sitting on his newspaper, and someone next to him asked him, are you reading that newspaper? And he thought for a second and replied, yes, I am. And he stood up and turned the page and sat down again. Jesus kind of makes us scratch our head with that question. Why would you ask a man who's been an invalid for 38 years, do you want to get well? I mean, who would not want to get well? Isn't that the whole idea of him laying by the pool? Day after day after day. Notice that the man never exactly answers Jesus, though. He never says, yes. His first words are an excuse. He gives an excuse why he's never been able to be the first one into the water. And John's words seem to indicate to us that his excuses are not very strong excuses. Whatever the reason, he never directly answers Jesus the question, do you want to get well? Remember, Jesus is the one answering the question, so just sort of by the fact that it's Jesus, we know that it was not a dumb question. It was not a dumb question. Maybe the question exposed the man's true heart and his motives. Maybe this guy had a heart issue along with it too. Maybe it was not all. Maybe it was all about this false belief that he could fix things and do it on his terms, in that sort of way. Certainly, there's always tough circumstances, and we can always come up with excuses of every kind. And that brings us to the third observation this morning, as there's always hope. There's always hope. Verse 6 tells us that Jesus somehow knew that he had been sick for a very long time. And his first question was, do you want to get well? And so what did Jesus tell him? He said, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. Now, this was not what the man expected at all. He wanted Jesus to help him get into the pool. Maybe Jesus' question stirred the waters of his own heart. And maybe after 38 years of putting his hope in this magical pool, he now was open to this new alternative. That would be our hope. We really don't know that much about what happened afterwards. We just know that he does. He rolls up his mat and he begins walking. Maybe your life today isn't exactly the way you thought it was placed. Maybe you're not in the place you thought you were going to be at this point. And as a matter of fact, you're not very happy about that. I can relate to this man sometimes. How about you? I can get so focused on lots of other things in my life, things I don't have, so I can sort of stare off into this proverbial pool, and I imagine one day when I'll be able to get into it. As soon as I get some of the needs met, some of these needs met, or these issues in my life ironed out, then life can move on. Then I'll be happy. For me, in different seasons of life, that pool, maybe we're staring off into the proverbial pool thinking, wow, if I could just get a fast car, that would be a really good thing. Or if I could get a high-paying job, then I'd be happy. Or if I could get married. Or if I could get in better shape. Or if I could get prepared for this upcoming competition, then I know I would feel a lot better. Or if I could have kids, or down the line, you can add whatever, if I could have whatever it is in your life, I will finally be happy. Now, none of the things that I listed off were exactly wrong in themselves. But when we become so focused on that next goal, the next promotion, the next achievement, the next season, whatever the next thing is that we're demanding happens before we can move on in life, we're going to miss the one who is all that we need. We miss the one who's all that we need. John does not give us the details of what's going on in this man's mind, but we do see that John's primary focus in this whole text is on what Jesus does. Jesus comes to this man who has spent 38 years focused on something that will never deliver. It'll never deliver. And he says, get up and walk today because you're healed. Today you are made whole. The pool over there will not make you well. He said, but I will. But I will. In this account, there's another part of the story, too, that comes up right after the healing. Somehow the Pharisees see this man now healed, carrying his mat and his bedroll, and that leads us to the last observation this morning. And the last observation is, even though there's hope, there's always going to be distractions. There's always going to be distractions that will try to steer you away from that hope. You would think that the focus of everybody would be on gratitude. I mean, this guy has been sick for 38 years and he's now well. But we find otherwise. And although there's nothing in the Bible that prohibits a man from carrying his bedroll on the Sabbath, the Pharisees identified that this man was violating some later invented traditions of minutely detailed rules about what was considered to be work on the Sabbath day, and therefore it was forbidden. The Pharisees were convinced that they were pleasing God. They were living to please God, to earn God's goodness to earn God's goodness in God's eyes, to earn their goodness in God's eyes, excuse me. They attended the synagogue every Sabbath, and they even sat in the same place every Sunday. Can you believe that? And they shouted down this healed guy. They said, "Hey, stop it! You can't do that. Don't you know it's illegal for you to carry your mat on the Sabbath?" I can only imagine what the guy's response to them was. Man, what a bummer. 38 years of waiting, and I got healed on the wrong day. I mean, what's up with that? Actually, when you think about it, I think that the Pharisees and this paralyzed man lying by the pool had a lot in common. They were both depending upon something very deceptive for what they thought was going to be real life. The paralyzed man looked to the deception of the pool, the false promises that would come from that. And the Pharisees were depending upon their performance. They were depending on being perfect. And that is equally as deceptive as any false promise out there. Just like the man, the Pharisees were figuratively lying by the pool of deceptive promises. They're so close, but somehow missing the mark, somehow missing Jesus' plan. They too live very predictable lives. It's very controllable and very measurable. But it's not what Jesus wanted. And it's not what Jesus wants for us. It's not the best. A little bit later in John, we see Jesus describing the kind of life that he wants to bring for every single person. He says, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. But my purpose is to give you, a life that is rich and satisfying. The paralyzed guy and the Pharisees were being deceived by the thief. Jesus wants something so much better for all of us. The first step to recognize the deception is to recognize that deception and to know where to find wholeness. Jesus knew the man was looking for wholeness in all the wrong places. There's no power in the pool. There's no power in the pool. Jesus wanted his heart. He wants to heal this guy's whole life. And so he meets up with the man a little bit later. And he told the man first, he tells him, the pool you've been sitting by will never make you well. It never could and it never will. That bank account won't make you well. That right job won't make you well. The house or the car or the perfect body or the perfect family, none of those are going to make you whole. Those right friends, the best college, sex won't, popularity won't, alcohol won't, drugs won't. And so Jesus heals his body first, but then he meets up with the man again, and his real purpose was to stir the waters in the man's heart. To stir him up so that he could see the free gift, the whole package, the free gift that Jesus wanted to give him. That now he could be set free from looking to other sources. That other voices of deception, other pools of Bethesda that were going to come up that will never work in his life. He would recognize them as lies, as absolute lies. We actually don't know how he responded to the last conversation he had with Jesus. We don't know a lot about the after part of what his life looked like. We are hopeful that when he told other people, and even some of his friends that used to lie with him at the pool of Bethesda, we're hopeful that he told them, I used to look at that pool. I used to lie there. I thought I would find everything I wanted in that pool. But then I stood face to face with the Son of God. He is the author of life in all of its fullness. He redirected the focus of my life, and now I've discovered no matter what the circumstances, He is the only one who can give me wholeness. I'm done with the excuses, and He is the one helping me through. He's the one that gives me hope and helps me through all the distractions. The first step is connecting with God, who has come to us through Jesus. He wants to restore our life. Maybe this morning you're feeling physically broken. Maybe you have an illness. Maybe you don't know what the future holds, and you're just plain fearful of what the future could be. Maybe somehow, some way, you feel like a failure. Maybe it's you're emotionally down right now, fighting depression. Maybe there's a relational brokenness going on and you're not really admitted to it to yourself, or maybe you're worried about one of your kids. Maybe you feel so alone right now as you fight against some pattern of addiction or sin in your life. Jesus wants to talk to each of us this morning. And I think his first question is the same question that he asked the man lying by the pool. Do you want to get well? Would you like to get well? It seems like a rhetorical question this morning, doesn't it? But have you grown comfortable? Have you grown complacent in the place where you're at? I think the second thing he asks us to do from this passage this morning is to recognize the deception. Stop being deceived. Stop your focus on things that others deceptively tell us will make us well. They'll always fail. They'll always fall short. Third one, stop with the excuses. Stop with the excuses. And the fourth, instead, listen for Jesus' call. Respond to Jesus. He is the perfect healer. He's the one who wants to bring wholeness to your life today. I want you to join me in a word of prayer right now. If everybody could just bow their heads. We're going to just spend a couple minutes, a few seconds actually, just taking some time with Jesus. And maybe you've got some business that you need to talk with him about this morning. Some personal items that are in your life where maybe you've been sort of dodging the question, would you like to get well? And this morning you know, absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, I want to get well. But I feel so helpless in the process. If you'd pray with me right now, we're going to ask Jesus to speak with you and just ask him to open up whatever the barrier is that might be in your life right now. And then ask him for help. Gracious Jesus, we thank you for this one and only life that you've given us. It truly is a gift. And every second, every day, every hour is precious. And I want to thank you this morning for the promise and the hope that only you can bring, but you bring so freely. We want to be well. We do. Open our eyes, open our hearts to see you and to sense you as our healer. Help us to live fully into the life that you offer. We pray these things in your name. Amen.